Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bible and Archaeology. We have a little bit of a special video today. We're doing a Bible and Archaeology response to your comments, concerns, and questions regarding one of our older podcasts that's been getting some attention recently because of another podcast. And one actor named Sir Mel Gibson, well, he's not a sir, but Mr. Mel Gibson, went on Joe Rogan recently to talk about a lot of things. And in that, he talked about the Shroud. And so as soon as that happened...
Which shroud is this?
I'm not totally sure which shroud this is. I think we're talking about the Shroud.
The Shroud of Turin.
The Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin that we've talked about before.
Yes.
We have a podcast on where we talk about the history of the Shroud, some of the studies around this. So you can go and check that out if you're wanting more. We're not going to walk through everything. But unsurprisingly, after Mel Gibson's podcast with Rogan, we got a lot of comments coming in. Things like, hey, you two don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
You should go see what Mel Gibson had to say on Joe Rogan and educate yourself.
Okay, well, time out. We went and did that. So I went and watched the Joe Rogan interview with Mel Gibson. By the way, I used to live in Malibu there with Mr. Gibson. He lived down the street.
So is this confirmation of one of the comments that we are on the Vatican payroll, Bob?
Well, as you can tell from the way I dress and the fine home here in Iowa that I live in, yes, Vatican payroll. Humanities professors are known for rolling in the dough. Are you kidding me? The Vatican payroll, really?
Yes.
That'd be nice.
The strain of comments is interesting. And as you said, we went and watched the part of the interview where Mel Gibson talks about the Shroud. So you don't have to go and watch through that. We're not going to walk through every detail that he had to say. He kind of did the greatest hits of, here are the assumptions that it depicts. He says, these are things he says. It depicts a first century Hebrew male. That it depicts an individual who was scourged and crucified. That it depicts an individual who had worn a crown of thorns. That the individual's hairstyle is from the first century. And that it was a Hebrew hairstyle. That pollen is from that region. That the weave is a first century weave. That we don't know how it was made, but it was an intense atomic light.
The weave he's referring to the fabric, not the Hebrew hairstyle.
I mean, I would assume so,
right.
But there's some ambiguity there.
Okay.
That an archaeologist told him if you look closely, you can see the image of Tiberius coin marks on the eyes.
I've heard that before.
And that previous attempts to date this were pulled from sections that were all areas that had been repaired.
And I've heard this before.
So this is kind of, it's a greatest hits of what are the reasons why the Shroud is legitimate or not legitimate?
Right. And up front, I think he's sincere in his beliefs. I think he's fully committed to his religious beliefs. And let's just acknowledge that. He represents a set of beliefs that are held by many people across the United States and around the world. And so this isn't in any way means to hate on Mr. Gibson. It's not. Correct. It's not that at all. This isn't. I love his movies. He's had a bunch of good ones. It's not an endorsement of him. It's not it's nothing personal against Mr. Gibson. Mr. Gibson's interview with Joe Rogan is a reflection of an ongoing debate.
Right.
As we can tell from some of the comments that we've gotten from some people.
It was just one of those instigations.
Correct.
That there's views from that. People are then searching for things. They come back. They're leaving us comments and their questions about us not knowing what we're talking about, that we haven't stayed up to date on the latest research.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that in our last podcast about this, we go through the article that they pull up in that interview. This is the one that they're using a new technology, that they're using wide angle X-ray scattering to date this material. Right. To say, they lean into the argument that the carbon-14 dating isn't reliable, that there's been disagreements, that there's too wide of a range, and this is a new tech that we should use to do this. And so this is the article we talked about last time. So one of the largest strains of comments is, you're not keeping up to date on the research. We read that article. We talked about that article.
We made a video about this. It's the same argument that we get about when we use BCE and CE and AD, and people say, why do you guys do this? And I was like, we have now made 3 videos about this and we explain it in depth. And then we go through and we make another one and we explain it and they go, I don't care. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay. So we have kept up with the latest research. We do try to explain this. We do try to address it. That's what we're going to do right now.
And you're not keeping up with the latest research. I think one of the betrayals of that argument that works against itself is, if you read that article, if you go and you read that article, not just the abstract, which
Right.
starts and gives you this nice summary, but does also really lean into the same depiction that
Right.
Gibson talks about here. But if you read all the way through, they themselves acknowledge this is a new technology. We did some other samples that we think confirm the ability of this to date things, but they're not fully able to say without a shadow of a doubt,
Right.
this can confidently date something because it's new.
It's new. They're still testing it out, and they acknowledge this in the article, in their own article, and they also acknowledge that previous research, previous scholarship has been able to confirm many things, and because their new technology is now giving different results from the established research over and over again, that, okay, well, maybe we need to look into this some more. Maybe we need some further examples, some further experiments before we can say if our new technology is...
Which is how good research should
Correct.
happen. And so within
Correct.
this article, again, as we've talked about with some other stories before, there can be a distinction between the technology that's used in a study
Mhm.
and then the way that that technology is leveraged to
Correct.
make certain claims. So at the end, they say a more accurate systematic X-ray investigation of more samples taken from the shroud fabric would be mandatory to confirm the conclusions of our study.
Correct.
They acknowledge this is a first step into this.
Right.
We say, as the authors, we need more. They
Right.
also say the experimental results are compatible with the hypothesis. So they're acknowledging in the technical way they have to do to get this published,
Correct.
we can't totally go out and say everything that we want. Someone else can pick it up and say that
Right.
and run that route. But when you're keeping up with the research, the criticism,
Right.
you need to stay up with the research. Yeah, do.
Right.
And read it. And what they say is, we would like it to be this, but we can't go all the way
Right.
there.
And this is the difference between actually reading the article and reading a summary of the article in a popular a journal, magazine, tabloid, wherever, newspaper.
Or just reading the headline that says new study confirmed.
Correct. What they're saying is, we don't know for sure. What they do say is, since the C14 dating does not agree with our results, they're saying all of these tests that have been performed scientifically before don't agree with the results that we got. That we're going to have to test this some more and do this again. They acknowledge up front that there's some issues and that this is new and that we're going to have to do some more testing. And they say the claim results match the results of another sample whose dating, according to historical records, is 55 to 74 AD, the siege of Masada. Okay, this is a little late, right? It's not the burial of Jesus. If it's from a later date. They're attempting to if you remember lawn darts, they're throwing darts and trying to establish some kind of validity for their new technique, but they're the first to admit we're going to have to test this some more. But when a publication picks up this and tries to report it, the way that you get headlines on this is to say, new study confirms, new study concludes, Shroud of Turin is authentic. That's what grabs the headlines. And then people reporting on it just read the big hits and they're like, oh, and now it's because it confirms what they want to believe.
Yeah.
They now say, oh, this new study confirms that the Shroud of Turin is real.
And the inclusion of some of the same description that Mel Gibson has regarding the study does use that same thing by describing the individual as having been scourged and crucified and wearing these things. That then you see that repeated in a technical article, which leads that individual or individuals to say, okay, that part has been confirmed. But that is an interpretation of that visual thing.
Correct.
And one of the comments we get the most in this from a lot of people is, well, you have to accept it because scientists don't know how to recreate it. Go ahead and recreate it, and then you can prove to me that it was a forgery or that it was a fake. And if you can't recreate it, then it has to be real.
Right.
Which just isn't. It's not how that works.
It's not how science works. So the example that I use all the time is people will argue against evolution by natural selection. They're saying, you don't know every step. You don't know exactly how it works. Therefore, it's false. To which I always say, well, we don't know how gravity works either. we have an idea. We have some theories about how we think gravity works, but we don't know exactly how gravity works. Therefore, gravity doesn't exist. Therefore, it doesn't work. No, of course it works. We just don't know exactly how it works. So this notion that because we don't know how they exactly created this image and we're still trying to figure out how they did create it, doesn't mean that therefore it's supernatural.
Right.
Doesn't mean that it's the same argument that they use for the aliens,
the pyramids
right?
and aliens,
right? If you can't tell me exactly how the ancient Egyptians use logs
and have
rolled
mass
it and,
consensus, everyone has to be on exactly
and
the
if you
same
can't tell
page.
us how it happened, therefore aliens, right? Therefore God, right? This isn't how the scientific method works. For those of you who are interested in apologetics, and this is called the God of the gaps argument. So there's a gap in our knowledge, and we say, okay, that's where God is, and then we'll find some new thing that explains how this happens. But then there's a gap here. And okay, well, God lives in here, and then we'll find some new, and then and so the problem, the fallacy with the God of the gaps argument is as science progresses, that gap gets smaller and smaller, and there's less and less room for insert God, aliens, right? Supernatural, whatever it is. Science is going to continue to fill this in. And anytime somebody comes up with a new procedure, oftentimes the first time they use that new procedure doesn't match with previous results. If it did, they probably wouldn't be reporting on it, or it would just be some confirmation of earlier. They want something new, especially if it's going to touch on the Shroud of Turin or some, the crown of thorns or whatever.
Right.
Until they test it again, which is what they're saying. We got to test it again. We got to test it again to see if this works. But the fact that it goes against established science, and again, I was part of a documentary series, Finding Jesus. CNN put this out years ago that actually looked at the Shroud of Turin and walked you through the science of how they think they manufactured this, how they think that, and it concluded with all the C14 that this was a 13th or 14th century medieval forgery. They walk you through that science. Plus, we brought in our last video all of the evidence that suggests, the actual material evidence, archaeological evidence that suggests this thing's a fake.
Well, again, turning to the comments for us.
Right.
One of the critiques, well, we're pointing to this evidence as being fake because we're not believers, or we're not Christian, we're on the Vatican payroll, we're this, we're that, or the other. And so we have a personal bias against this thing being real. That's not our position coming to this.
No.
But if you're wanting to say, well, let's look at the stakes that individuals have in this, a point worth noting is that one of the authors who's listed on this article, one of the names at the top, not just someone included, Giulio Fanti, has said previously, when asked, do you believe the shroud is likely the burial cloth? They say, I must separate scientific aspects from religious ones. However, they go on to say, because following a precise question of mine, I had a personal answer in 1998 in front of the relic. And so they have a claim of personal revelation of the validity of this.
Right.
And then saying, I'm separating things.
Right.
But if you have a divine revelation that this thing is real,
right,
how does one go about separating that from your scientific study that you say we're separating these things?
Right.
Except you bring in the language of the tradition of the faith experience.
Right.
That
everybody, I mean, this is the thing is, well, you don't believe, or you're not, you have some bias against this. That's why you're saying this. But that often overlooks the fact that a lot of these people who are arguing for the Shroud of Turin are on the Vatican payroll, or are some kind of part of some kind of confessional organization that really want this thing to be real. And when you actually go through and look at all of the evidence, and again, they're looking at one piece of evidence. They're challenging the carbon-14 dating with a new form of, spectral X-ray or whatever, that might not line up. But they're overlooking all of the other evidence, right? Orit Shamir wrote this article about this Z-spun fabric. And if you look at closely, you can see the wafts, the back and forth in the fabric. And Orit Shamir points out that you basically don't have this kind of fabric in Israel, in ancient Palestine, in the first century. It does appear, but it appears to be imported, right? So it's not the kind of common fabric that you would find that you would use in a shroud for a crucifixion. The fabric isn't the kind of fabric that you would expect to be there, right? You would find it in medieval Rome,
right?
You're medieval, medieval Europe, right? But you wouldn't find it in Israel in the first century. Some of the iconography itself, they're saying, oh, look at this beautiful image. This isn't how blood runs up on a burial shroud. B, John 26 says that there was a separate facial. In fact, someone else actually has what they believe to be the facial shroud, the facial cloth, separate from the body linens. Because remember in John 20, there was a separate face cloth from the body linen. But also, Dan McClellan points out in his video that the hands, if you ever lie down on your bed, you put your hands on your belly. But the hands here are reaching way down and covering up his groin.
Modesty.
Yeah, it's like one of these fig leaves on a statue in the Vatican, right? Apparently, Jesus had really, really long hands and really long fingers, and he was covering. The image doesn't make any sense. Now, of course, you would expect somebody who's going to forge this to go in and put in the whipping marks and go in and put something that looks like the crown. It matches all of the things that would fit with the medieval legend, the picture of the crucifixion. With
the image that they would expect at the time, the image that they understand, the tradition that they have.
But, they talk about the Billy Rubin, the theory that blood usually turns black. And they're saying, oh, no, this blood, there was this Billy Rubin because of the scourging and
the trauma and the event that happens
so it kept it red forever. No, iron rusts.
Yeah.
Right. This is hemoglobin. This is iron. Iron tends to rust. It's not going to stay red like this, right? If you look at all of the different pieces of evidence, whether it's the iconography on the image, on the shroud itself, how the image got there, all of the evidence, then you look at the carbon-14 dating and you go, yeah, this is 13th, 14th century. And then they'll say, oh, but this
that comes from a part that was repaired.
This was repaired. They took multiple samples, by the way.
By the way, got really lucky in picking all repair parts.
The reason the Vatican doesn't want you to take any more carbon-14 samples is this reason, right? They allowed it, and it came out to the 13th to 14th century. So what we need to be careful of is one piece of experimental science, one kind of experiment coming in and saying, and very carefully, to the author's credit, they said, our results don't match previous results, so we got to do some more tinkering, some more experimentation. But it doesn't stop the public from misinterpreting this and saying, oh, they've proved that the Shroud of Turin. No, they didn't. There's different sides of this stuff. So this doesn't prove that it's authentic. What it says is they got some new data that's different from the carbon-14, and they got to go back and check it again.
We got to go back and check it again. Yeah. So we did see your comments. We have heard you. We've seen you. If you'd like to see the full conversation, we'll put a link to that podcast down in the description. You can go and watch the conversation going through some of the history, some more specifics from that. If you want to let us hear your thoughts on this one, leave it down in the comments. We'll happily hear your perspectives, your opinions on this. But we've heard from you. We went and watched it, and we're of the same position that we were before.
Yeah.
But we just wanted to make sure we wanted to touch base on that, we saw it. But we're still in the same place. Yeah,
we do listen to your comments. And the first comments, even after this video, are going to be, these two clowns don't know what they're talking about. These two guys hate Jesus. These two guys, we're still going to be on the Vatican payroll, which you're welcome to.
They're sending the checks to the wrong address.
Yeah, we're not getting it. So if you would please correct that and send that right away. I get Christmas bills to pay. We're going to get these same comments because, people will say, you guys are fixed in your ways. So are a lot of the people making the comments. They want this to be true. And I get it. I on the Netflix special, we talked about why people believe in these relics. The relics are the closest thing that we have to archaeological evidence, and I use that term loosely, that proves something that should be held on faith. And that's why people chase relics. That's why the whole phenomenon began in the first place, is because this is a way to center the mind, to touch or to on the reality, or as close as you can get to the reality of the life of Jesus, his resurrection, his, the chance of immortality that we have with God. this is the closest thing that we have to it, are these relics. And so when you start challenging that, some people feel like their identity as a Christian is being challenged, when that's not what we're doing at all. What we're saying is, based on the evidence, this thing's probably a medieval forgery. Does that stop me from going to see it? Does that stop me from going to see the crown of thorns and going? No, of course not. But we have to work in the realm of evidence, and the evidence is still saying that this is a medieval forgery.
So there you have it. There's our response. Let us know your comments, your questions, your concerns. If we need to come back, we can come back again in the future. But for today, for Bob, I'm Jordan. Thank you for tuning in.